Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
As I imagine is the case for most people, the approach I took when brewing my very first batch of beer was based 100% off of the step-by-step guidelines that were given to me by the folks from the homebrew shop where I bought my kit. I viewed those steps more like hard rules that, if broken, would result in a beer that had any number of problems. Well, as I progressed in my brewing, I not only began to realize that certain steps weren't as totally necessary as I thought, but I also began to develop little tricks of my own, things that I would do that weren't recommended, but did improve my brewing experience and or the quality of my beer. For example, harvesting yeast from starters. This is something that saved me a ton of money. I mean, back when that idea came to me, I'd never heard of anyone else doing it. It seemed kind of crazy. I just had the thought while making a starter one night and I gave it a shot. It worked out so well that I shared it with others. And then eventually that became one of the things that Brülosophy was known for. Now, one thing I'm certain of is that I am not the only one who leans on these secret little tricks. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott. And for this Brews Views episode, I asked patrons of Brülosophy to share some of the unique things they do that have improved their brewing, some of which doesn't get much focus, as it's kind of kept like a secret because it doesn't really align with brewing convention. My hope is that our listeners will hear something that we talk about on this episode that they maybe haven't thought of themselves and that, can make their brewing life and or beer more enjoyable. Now, real quick, this is a Brews Views episode where we tend to let our hair down a little bit more than usual, meaning I might use some words that some folks choose to be offended by. If that's you, feel free to skip this episode. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for helping us to keep it going, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique perks from YakimaValleyHops.com, as well as a flat 20% discount at Northern Brewer. This is a crazy deal that is only available to Brülosophy patrons. You can also get an invite to a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor, as well as inclusion in episodes like this one, as well as our Brew and A episodes. Learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support. When shopping online, your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral that helps us to cover the cost of running all of this stuff. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else it is that you listen to podcasts, that would be awesome too. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing related content, sell what we believe to be some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120 volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger like their powerful 240 volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener Clayton Latham hit us up with some feedback after hearing me share my thoughts on a non-beer alcoholic beverage. Clayton said, Scotch is like craft beer. Oftentimes, its biggest fans are its worst representatives. Like so many craft beer fans give the layman a super bitter double IPA and say, this is craft beer, instead of offering a craft Helles or a Belgian blonde. Similarly, Scotch fans will hand the layman Laphroaig 10 or Lagavulin 16 and say, this is Scotch. Not one beer is craft beer and not one Scotch is Scotch. We need to open up with the unpeated Speyside Highlands like Oban 14 and gentler options. We probably need to do a couple of drops of water. Just be conscientious. Then again, like surfers say, surfing sucks, don't try it, in hopes that they don't have to fight for waves. Scotch is already expensive enough. Imagine if twice as many people wanted to drink it. Personally, I can find something that I like about every Scotch that I've had. I have not found the hazy IPA of Scotch yet. Hugs and kisses. You know what, Clayton? Amen. I know that you asked me if I agree with you in your email, and I do in many ways. I have noticed that people often tend to assume that Scotch is Scotch or bourbon is bourbon or whatever it might be. And while I can understand how this might be the case for the uninitiated palate, there are absolutely differences between different distillers, the region from where those different Scotches come from. The same way an IPA from Sierra Nevada Brewing Company is going to taste different than one from, say, Georgetown Brewing up in Seattle or Sapwood Cellars out in Maryland. Also, while I have my favorites, I don't presume it's going to be everybody else's favorite. Preference is subjective. I say that all the time. And because of that, when I share a Macallan 12 with a friend and they say they don't like it, I don't get offended. Rather, I reach for something else to see if they might have a different opinion and maybe they like something that isn't my favorite. Now, while I've never had a Scotch that I hate, I have certainly had some that I don't think I'd pay for again, but I still enjoyed trying it all the same. That's just the nature of preference and being human. Thank you so much for hitting us up, Clayton. If you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. Don't forget to pick up your Brülosophy merch over at brulosophy.com/shop. We are offering more options than we ever have before, from t-shirts, hoodies, and hats to fanny packs, shorts, coffee mugs, and so much more. We've done our best to keep prices reasonable, and international shipping is now available. Again, you can head to brulosophy.com/shop, click one of the product images on that page, or you can go directly to our Dashery store at brulosophy.dashery.com. We've also put a link in the description of this episode.
What would you do if your online store converted 36% more shoppers? You could take 36% more vacation.
Another pina colada? Yes, please.
Open a new retail location with 36% more square feet.
Fantastic.
Hire 36% more help.
You're hired and you're hired.
Shopify has the world's best converting checkout, up to 36% better than other e-commerce platforms. What you do with those extra sales is up to you. Switch to Shopify today at shopify.com/listen and get a $1 trial. Shopify.com/listen.
Stop guessing and start perfecting your craft with Brewfather, the ultimate tool for recipe design. Brewfather Premium unlocks advanced inventory tracking, tilt integration for real-time fermentation monitoring, and seamless cloud sync across all of your devices. But wait, there's more. Premium Plus just changed the game with Brewfather's brand new AI recipe integration. Whether you're looking to clone a rare commercial classic or need a creative spark for a unique grain bill, Brewfather AI helps you build balanced, world-class recipes in seconds. Brewing is a science. Make it art with Brewfather Premium Plus by visiting brewfather.app today. That's brewfather.app. Better beer is just a click away. When I drop the request for our patrons to share their dirty little brewing secrets, those tips that they may not really talk much about because they break the brewing rules, I specifically ask that they share only one and that they keep their responses somewhat succinct. And I'm glad that I did, because we ended up getting quite a few responses. The first of which comes from patron Josh Edwards, who says, maybe not a brewing tip or secret in the way that you stage the question, but my secret, or I guess not so secret anymore, he says, is that I don't always clean and sanitize my kegs between batches. If I've got a kicked keg in my kegerator and a freshly fermented batch ready to go into a keg, I just close transfer into that keg, don't even dump out any sediment. I figure it was sanitized when the original batch went into it, and it's been refrigerated since. There's pretty low chance of it catching a bug. Okay, Josh, this is you're not the only person I've heard from who does this. And I am so neurotic when it comes to the fear of contaminating a batch that I don't think I've ever done that. If I have, it was probably because I'd had a few too many to drink and I thought I wanted to save some time. But I think your reasoning is spot on, that if you had a whole batch, a 5-gallon batch of beer in a corny keg, and it was great and it never went bad, and you're confident that there's no microbes in there that could ruin a new beer. Yeah, I doubt there's going to be that much sediment at the bottom of that keg. If it was a lot, it would have come out in those first few pints anyways. That racking of fresh beer into that keg does seem kind of safe. I guess, again, my neuroses, one, is about potential for contamination. It's so easy for me to clean and sanitize kegs that I just do it out of a precaution. But also, I would be a little bit concerned if, say, if I had an IPA that keg kicked, and then I racked like a Pilsner on there. Maybe you're not doing that. Maybe you're going with, similar styles of beer. But dude, if it works for you, that's pretty cool. And for the folks out there who might be thinking about, or who really find, keg cleaning and sanitizing annoying, this might be something you could do. I would wonder how many times will you reuse a keg before you finally clean it? Because my hunch would be that after like 4 or 5, at some point you're going to start to get some stuff that's maybe latched onto the stainless steel keg, the inside of that keg. Maybe not affecting the flavor of the beer, but it's just kind of gross anyways. But good tip. Next one comes from Dustin Brown. He says, this isn't anything groundbreaking, but I like to have all ingredients measured out and ready to go prior to brew day. Overbuilt starters a few days out, RO water in the kettle, hop and water additions are bagged and labeled, and my, I think he means water salts, and my anvil foundry set so that when I wake up, strike temperature is already there. I brew in the early morning hours, and this allows me to get the bulk of my brew day complete before my wife and kids are awake. This speeds up the brew day, makes brewing more relaxing, and helps to ensure I don't make any mistakes. Dustin, this is absolutely something that I've been doing for well over a decade, probably the better part of 2 decades at this point. And I can honestly say that if it weren't for pre-planning my brew days, which for me includes, weighing out and even milling the grain the night before, gathering all of my water, adjusting it with my minerals, doing all of that, I don't know if Brülosophy as it is today would be here, because that really did make it so easy for me just to wake up, go outside, flip a couple switches, go back inside, tend to my babies at the time. They're all teenagers now. And it really made it so seamless and easy. Now, I am not brewing as often as I was doing back when I was building Brülosophy by myself. So I've had a few brew days in the new place where, it's kind of a random, I'm just going to go brew today, and I take care of everything for a single batch or whatever day of. But I think 1 or 2 batches so far that I've brewed, I still prep this way because I just find it so nice to be able to wake up whenever, go out into the garage, flip a couple switches, and just get going. Absolutely great time saver, and and also it makes it easier for me to, when I come out in the morning, I double check everything that I've got laid out. So if I forgot something the night before, I catch it for the most part, I would hope. Whereas if you're doing it all day of, you might miss something. So good tip. Next one comes from Jeremiah Pickard, who says, music. I tend to choose the playlist based on what I'm making. He says, I'm a pagan, so I believe that the energy you put out directly affects the result of whatever you're doing. A little sidebar here, Jeremiah. We had this idea for an experiment many years ago where we ferment, the identical beer. So like a 10-gallon split batch into 2 identical fermenters, but one goes into a chamber with like Megadeth, and the other one we'd play like Chopin or some like classical music, and see if if like the yeast reacted differently during fermentation based on the music that's being played. We haven't done it yet, but I'd be curious. It would be, if it was significant, I think it would validate what you're saying here. Either way, Jeremiah says, for instance, when I'm making veiled communion, my imperial milk stout for, I don't know how to say this, Samhain, something like that. I play bands like Heilung and Vorduna and other dark Nordic folk styles. It not only puts me in a good headspace, but I feel it helps impart a characteristic into my finished beer that wouldn't otherwise be there. Oh, that is a cool one. I'm not sure I believe that what you do about music and how it directly affects the results of things that we're doing and all of that stuff, but I certainly find the idea appealing. And a brew day does not go by where I don't have something on in the background. I think I brewed yesterday morning, and I was listening to a band called Pine Grove. I think they're out of the Midwest. Really nice, just kind of indie, folk rock type music, whatever, made me feel good. And that to me is what's important. So, but yeah, maybe I'll have to try listening to something a little bit more aggressive when I'm making a, big old hoppy IPA or something. All right. William Posky says, no boil DME starters and vitality starters. He says, I use a clean flask, so he sanitizes it. DME out of the bag, bottled water. It's sanitized, right? Yeast, no issues to date. And I generally have a starter going at all times. 2 brews a week on average. And the quote, club yeast dude. That used to be me too, William. I can only say that when talking about beer. Experience changer because it is so easy. Okay, William, again, kind of like I said earlier, this is something I have heard, not many, but a few other people doing with great success. I have never done that. And again, because of my concerns with contamination and not wanting to ruin a batch based on something I did, a week earlier and just didn't know about, for example, picking up some sort of a bug in my starter, I don't do that. I find making starters to be kind of a Zen process. It's super easy for me. And one of the little secret tips that I'm going to share at the end of this episode has to do with the starter thing. It's not harvesting from starters, which I think, again, is a great way to save a lot of money. But yeah, man, if it's working for you, I think that's awesome. Again, it's not shaving a ton of time off, maybe about half an hour, because you've got to wait for that starter to come up to a boil, and then you have to let it boil, and then you have to chill it before you can pitch your yeast. With what you're proposing, William, I would imagine you're mixing it with cold water, so as soon as it's all homogenized, you can just throw your yeast in and you're off to the races. I may have to give this a shot at some point. I just have to get over my fear first. All right. Al Bro says ferulic acid rest, so 43 degrees Celsius or 109 degrees Fahrenheit, for 15 minutes at the beginning of your mash will make clove absolutely pop with POF positive yeast. That is the phenolic off flavor positive yeast, like Abbey or Abbey works great. I know that there are several others. If you're into dry yeast, you can get Belle Saison. That's a POF positive yeast. Al says, just be cautious of scorching as you ramp up to your alpha and beta amylase rests. Yes, I don't have it in front of me right now, but we have done some experimentation on different rest temperatures and whatnot, including the ferulic acid rest right there at about 109 degrees Fahrenheit. And it really does seem to have an impact. I mean, if you're looking to get a stronger spice or clove note in styles where that's appropriate, at least, give it a shot. If you're using an electric brewing system like so many people seem to be doing these days, it is insanely easy to just set, as your strike temperature, set that ferulic acid rest temp, let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes, and then just gently ramp it up to your saccharification rest temperature. That's your 150 F, give or take 5 to 6 degrees. Yeah, and it may very well be that the way that yeast interacts with the whatever it is that's happening in the wort when you hold it at that temperature, it really does seem to produce a stronger clove flavor. If you're missing that, for example, if you're making a lot of Bavarian Weiss beer and they're coming out as banana bombs and you want a little bit more of that clove flavor, this might be the ticket. Doing something, it might add 15 to 20 minutes to your brew day, but if the benefit outweighs that time, then I would say that it's worth it. So thank you so much for that tip, Al. That's not something I've ever done, but when I don't brew very many clovey type styles of beer on my own. And when I do, the yeast that I use tend to produce just the right amount of clove for me. I'm not a huge fan of that flavor. But if that's something you're looking for, again, I think it's a great tip. All right, number 6 comes from Donald Housel, who says, probably too basic, but I love fermenting 4.25 gallon batches in corny kegs with a spooning valve on 2 to 5 psi, raising the pressure at some point to get carbonation started, purging sanitizer-filled kegs along the way. When fermentation is finished, gravity filling the serving keg, pressure gets it started, using a gas line from the serving keg back to the fermentation keg to keep it in an oxygen-free closed loop. This is such a clever idea. I've seen it done. I've seen photos. I basically do the same thing, but I don't close the loop. I just haven't found it to be necessary with the way that I'm doing things. But yes, fully closed loop, no opportunity for oxygen ingress is such a good idea. And also one of the best, in my opinion, most effective or efficient types of fermentation vessels that you can use are corny kegs. They're completely sealed. Everybody's got extra disconnects lying around. You could easily fashion those to do what I do, which is kind of an open loop, you could say, or do a closed loop setup just like this. Yeah, corny kegs are 5 gallons, so you don't want to ferment a full 5 gallons in there. You're probably going to get some nasty blow off. That'll just be a pain in the ass to clean. So if you go down to 4.25 gallons, which I believe is right around like 18 or 17 liters or so, you do that, it's going to be great. Plus, like you said, Donald, you can do it under pressure, which I'm not sure it has any impact on the perceivable characteristics of beer, but it does build up that pressure to make transfers easier, as well as starts to kind of pre-carbonate your beer, which is pretty great. So great tip. All right, Tom Sills says, frequent use of the refractometer can result in shortening or lengthening any step in the process in order to achieve targets. This is something I have so much experience with. There are people out there, and I'm not quite sure I understand their argument, unless they're just codgers who they're old school and they prefer to use hydrometers. But there are people out there who just hate refractometers. I have a refractometer that it's the same one that I bought, I think, 15 years ago. I have done side-by-side comparisons with my finishing gravity hydrometer in water, that is really well calibrated. It's identical. I've done it with wort, with a standard hydrometer, sweet wort, pre-boil, all that stuff. Right on, spot on. I find the refractometer so much easier to use and cleaner, really, than hydrometers, at least for OG. I do not use my refractometer for final gravity. I just don't trust the calculations as much as I do a hydrometer. Plus, I like to sample my beer when it's done fermenting. So if I'm testing it out, I'm testing the FG to see if it's reached. I'm also tasting that sample so I don't feel like it's going to waste. But just yesterday, I told you I was brewing a batch of beer. And I don't know what happened, but my pre-boil gravity, which I always test with my refractometer, was just, it's about 4 or 5 points low. Nothing crazy. I didn't mind, but it's my new brewery. I'm setting it all up, and I really I want to dial in all of my numbers just right. And so I tested it. I realized that I was a little bit low. And so all I had to do to fix that was boil a little bit longer until I hit my pre-boil gravity. Once it was there, I started my 1 hour countdown and started my hop additions. And lo and behold, I hit all of my numbers exactly as they were planned. I wouldn't have known that if I didn't use my refractometer to take a really quick and easy test of the wort, where the specific gravity of my wort was at. So thank you, refractometer. I couldn't agree with you more, Tom. And they're so cheap. I believe my brother just bought one like a few 6 months ago or something, and I think he paid like $30 for it on Amazon. So, convenience, and they're durable, and they're super easy to calibrate. Just use some I use freaking tap water. It's not that big of a difference. And they come with a little screwdriver that you can just adjust it to. Really great stuff. I'm a big fan of refractometers. All right, Wizard Scientist says wastewater equals wash water. My old immersion chiller is not super efficient. Brewing uses a lot of water and energy, so I try to make things as efficient as I can. Rather than running the outlet water down the drain or into the yard, I collect it in 5-gallon buckets. When a bucket is mostly full, I take it down to the basement and dump it into the laundry tub. I might save a bucket or two for mixing up star sand or equipment cleaning too. If I time it right, I finish cleaning up at about the same time my wife finishes the laundry, and we can hang out and cheers with a homebrew to jobs well done. I feel like I just talked about this recently on an episode, the fact that, I just got another RO filter. And as anybody who makes their own RO water is very well aware, you produce far more wastewater than you do clean, low TDS RO water. So what to do with all that? Do you just run it down the drain? Well, for me right now, I do not use it in my laundry. I've never done that. I've heard of that before. Again, never done it, never thought of it. That seems to me like it'd be a little cumbersome given how we do things here at my house, at least. But during the summer, where we live here in Fresno County, it gets very, very hot, and we're only allowed to run our sprinklers a certain amount of time per day. So what I do is I take that water, which is, for me, it's only about 1.5 buckets. So it's like 8 gallons of wastewater for a full 5-gallon batch of beer for me to get that RO water. I take that and I go around to all the dry spots on my lawn and I overwater those spots. And no joke, it has significantly helped to make those spots less brown and more green. We also have a bunch of plants around our house that don't get any sprinkler. We have to, intentionally go and water them. So I'll use that water for that. And a part of me, I am no green thumb, by the way, but a part of me wonders that wastewater has, all of that extra stuff in it that the RO filter is stripping out. I wonder if that isn't, that's probably pretty good for these plants, I would think. So I feel good doing that. Do I still waste a little bit of water? Yeah, a little bit. It's kind of difficult not to when you're brewing, but I do try to repurpose any wastewater that I have. Same thing with the chiller water. I still use a copper IC. I'm using the Jaded Brewing Hydra. And with that, I save the first 5 or 6 gallons of hot water. That stays in the bucket. When I'm all done brewing, I use that hot water for all of my cleaning. I don't have a sink in my brewery. Unfortunately, that would be so convenient. But I do have that hot water. And so I use that with my cleaner of choice and I scrub everything down and it works so well. And then that dirty water, again, I'll go and I'll put it on dry spots in my lawn. I'll go water some plants with it. The only thing it has in it is some hot matter and maybe a little bit of wort that got stuck to the side of the kettle. So yeah, good stuff. All right, Mike Roca says, I have a system where I can't do full volume mashes. Rather than measure out sparge water and mash water, I just measure total water, heat it, add minerals, and drain as much as the pot that I use will fit. I then just keep this water hot on the stove until sparge time. It hasn't done me wrong in my normally 8 to 10 pound grain bills. Oh my God, Mike, this is one of those things. I remember when I first transitioned from extract with steeping grains to all grain, I was doing batch sparge to start, as most people in that era were doing, because it was so easy. You do the converted cooler mash tun, all that stuff. The talk about, water to grist ratio and, volume for your mash versus the volume of water that you should use to sparge with. And it was as if, any tiny little tweaks would really have this like noticeable impact on the ultimate character. It does not. It never did for us. We have done comparisons, full volume mashing versus, batch sparge versus fly sparge, and we just cannot flesh it out. So one of the tips that I first heard that was sort of along the lines of what it sounds like you're saying, Mike, I forget who it came from. It might have been Mike McDole, Tasty McDole, had said that he just splits his full volume in half. And that's how he determines his mash volume and his sparge volume. It may not have been Tasty. I don't quote me on that, but it was somebody. And so I tried that and it worked out great. I only moved to full volume mashing because I had the ability to do it. And I did one of the experiments that showed that it didn't have any noticeable, impact versus a batch that was batch sparge. So I stuck with that. I have the space for it. If I didn't, I would do exactly what you're doing. Just preheat my full volume of water, mash with what fits, and then use the rest for almost a batch sparge. I probably wouldn't even fly sparge it, just to make sure that you get your full volume. If you're going to do that, you probably should take some notes, and over the course of 3 or 4 batches, you should be able to develop a nice equipment profile that can predict with, pretty good accuracy what your OG is and all of that stuff. You just have to mind your losses and such. But yeah, absolutely. This is one of those things that if you 10, 15 years ago, if you were at a homebrew club and you brought this up, chances are you were going to get some dirty looks from folks because they understandably believed that you have to sparge with this amount of water. You have to have this liquor to grist ratio. You have to have all the... No, you're doing what works for you. It is working for you. And I say, keep doing it. So that might be something, again, that really benefits people who are listening to this, who feel stuck, having to do it the way that their homebrew shop person told them that they have to do it. There's a lot of flexibility in this thing, brewing. this thing we call brewing, I should say. All right, final comment for this segment comes from Matt Bigelow. He says, when adding gelatin to my kegs, I make up the gelatin solution in a glass measuring cup and then use a 50 or 100 milliliter syringe to inject it into the keg via the PRV. I just unscrew the PRV from the keg, inject gelatin in, screw the PRV back on, and then do a couple quick purges with CO2. My thought process is that it's way less oxygen exposure than opening the whole keg and easier than trying to build one of those injector tools to go in through one of the ball lock connectors. If you want to be really crazy, you can hook CO2 up to the outpost at like 1 to 2 psi while you do it, and there will be positive pressure pushing CO2 out while you inject further, reducing chances of oxygen getting in. Yes, Matt, this is something that I still am working on in my brewery. When I add gelatin, which I do to almost every batch of beer, I'm still going OG rudimentary where I make it in my measuring cup. It's still hot. I just barely crack open the top of my fermenter and I pour it in and then I close it and I purge it real quick and I cross my fingers that no oxygen made its way in there. I'm certain a little bit did. But here's my idea. It is actually very similar to what you said. I just bought a pack of 3 100 milliliter syringes on Amazon. I think it was like $4. And I have tubing that fits, it's intended, right, to fit on a disconnect. So you attach one end to the disconnect, a small length of that tubing, you attach it to the syringe, and then you can just pump it right into the ball lock disconnect. I don't find that very troublesome. So to me, that seems the most efficient way to fully eliminate any oxygen ingress. But look what I'm doing now, and I'm not having much trouble. I feel like your solution here is great for people who don't want to go through the trouble of making a little doohickey like I just talked about. I would imagine though that, removing your PRV takes just as long as connecting a sanitized, ball lock disconnect to a fermentation vessel. So whatever floats your boat, I'm going to do it my way and I'll report back on it once I finally get it built. It should be done for the batch of beer I made yesterday, but I love the idea. Jordan Folks, he, Brülosophy's one of our contributors here. He does what I saw first talked about probably 10 or 12 years ago, where he has a water bottle with a ball lock screw-on cap that he pressurizes with the gelatin solution in there so that when he connects it to his fermentation vessel or keg, it will just kind of blow in without any oxygen as well. You can squeeze out all of the air, then you pressurize it so it's just full of CO2 and gelatin, put it right on there, and it sucks it right in without any oxygen. All kinds of clever tips, just like the ones that we talked about in this segment. We do have to get to a quick break. We will be right back with more brewing secrets and tips.
You didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. All right, the next unique brewing tip comes from patron Jason Gann, who says, "My lack of trust in instrumentation has taught me to always calibrate my equipment. sometimes multiple times throughout the brew day. I use solutions to check my pH meter each brew day. And he says, I know Marshall doesn't worry about pH anyway. I do not. He says, I have a digital and analog thermometer that I trade back and forth, and I zero my hydrometer before each reading. I find that the calibration will actually drift during the brew day. I don't know if it's humidity or temp swings, but it can be off by as much as 3 or 4 gravity points in the middle of a brew day and then drift back afterwards. Wow, Jason, I've never had that kind of a calibration issue with any of my gear. But if I had that experience, I would do exactly what you would do. Look, probably the most annoying thing to calibrate, at least for me and my experience, was my digital pH meter. I hated calibrating that thing. You had to get the solutions out. You had to do 2 or 3 different solutions, make sure they were all spot on, make the tweaks that you needed to make. That is not why I stopped caring about mash pH. With the water that I use and the way I brew, it never seemed to have any impact whatsoever, whether objectively or even perceptibly. So I just don't worry about it these days. But I have another story from my brew day yesterday. I use, an electric brewing system that has a controller with a temperature reading on it. So it has a probe in the kettle and it reads the temperature as the water or the wort is heating up. So I trusted it, which I'm probably not going to do ever again. I heated the water all the way up, my strike water all the way to the recommended strike temperature that I saw in Brewfather, and went ahead and mashed in, got all my grains homogenized, did that whole thing, ran to the kitchen while the mash was waiting, made quick breakfast. And while I was there, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go test it with my ThermaPen, my fast acting, thermometer. Went out there and I was 21 degrees cool. And I thought, wait a minute, there's no way this dropped 21 degrees in 15 minutes. That has never happened. It was 85 degrees outside. Something is going on here. So I immediately trust my ThermaPen. I went and tested it in some cold water. It measured 0 or whatever it was. It was all good. And so I heated my mash up. It took about 5 minutes to heat up to the actual mash temp that I was aiming for. And then I started doing a little bit of research. And what I discovered is that the way my controller gets those temperature readings is through a 3.5 millimeter standard plug like you would see on headphones. And what I read was that if there's anything like water that gets in that plug when you connect it, it can actually throw off the readings substantially. So I go and I unplug everything and I dry it all off and I put it back together. And sure enough, everything was lined up again. I was back to the proper temperature. So the lesson that I learned in that one isn't necessarily one of calibration, but for things that matter, which I would argue that mash temperature matters. We know that it does, even if it doesn't have, an impact on sweetness and stuff like that. It has an absolute impact on fermentability and such. And if I were to have left that wort sitting at 130 degrees for a full hour, thinking that it was at 150, and then move forward, who knows what would have happened. So I'm glad I caught that. So the lesson that I learned was double check certain things like that. I've got a really nice thermometer. I may as well put it to use. And I'm with you. I've never had calibration issues. My refractometer, I always test it prior to my brew day, prior to taking my pre-gravity SG readings. Consistently, it's always spot on. Like, I very rarely have to actually calibrate it. I haven't had to calibrate it in the last 4 brew days because it's spot on, regardless of what water I'm using to test it out. Bottled water, distilled water, tap water. So I guess I'm fortunate we don't have much humidity here. So maybe that is the culprit for your calibration issues, Jason. All right, Tom says sanitizer, phosphoric acid in my case, spray bottle. Go nuts on everything cold side all the time. I'll be the first to admit that my cleaning habits are short and shoddy at best, but I have never had a spoiled batch in my life because if I've killed the bacteria, it doesn't matter. And to make it easier on the fingers, Kegland just released an electric spray bottle as well. Yes, I keep a bucket of sanitizer solution. I use Star San, so phosphoric acid as well. I keep a bucket in my brewery at all times. I swap it out as soon as it starts to look gross or the pH gets out of the range where it's effective, which I believe is higher than something like 3.5 pH or 4 pH, something like that. Then I'll just make a new batch. I take some of that new batch and I fill a spray bottle with it and I use it on everything. When my kids were babies with, bottles and stuff like that, or binkies, we would actually clean their bottles and such and then give them a nice sanitizer soak with my brewing sanitizer, just because, if they dropped a binky on the ground, just go dip it in some Star San solution and give it back to them and they're good to go. So yeah, I'm with you. If you're doing that, Tom, I'm not sure I would describe your cleaning habits as being short and shoddy at all. That to me seems very thoughtful and probably not a bad idea. I brewed probably, God, what was it, like 15 years ago? I was brewing a first batch with my brother-in-law. And I explained to him before we got into it, look, the cleaning and the sanitizing, it is borderline nutso. Like, with the amount that we focus on that. And even with all of that, he was touching his wort with his hands and doing all these things that I just could never imagine doing. So I tend to be a little bit more on the nut side. And if you're spraying sanitizer on everything, Tom, yeah, you might think you're doing being a little bit shoddy, but I'm going to go ahead and say you're probably further ahead than a good majority of brewers out there. So James Splinter says, this tip, which works for me, and I only use specifically for hazy IPAs, 30-minute boil, no bittering hops. I do 5 IBU at 5 minutes, 20 IBU in the Whirlpool, and then a heavy dry hop. While some people preach all IBUs come from Whirlpool, there's something about that 5-minute boil addition that adds the flavor I want. That is kind of an idiosyncratic. This is exactly what I was asking for. Are there little things that people have learned really works well for them that might actually have a positive impact for other people as well? Something that I don't do and that I would question a little bit, at least in the way you wrote this, James, is that you're basing your hop additions, those later kettle additions, or even your Whirlpool addition on IBU as opposed to amount. When I design a recipe, the only time I pay attention to IBU, which, just keeping it real here, our idea of IBU is so off compared, the predictions that we get in Brewfather are so different than what you would get if you were to send it into a lab for testing. That being said, if we're familiar enough with it, then it kind of doesn't matter, right? Because we're going to design it to where we want it to be, what we know works for us. But in my experience, the only time that really matters is on those initial, what we used to call bittering additions, those 60 to 45 minute kettle additions, because that's really what those are for anyways. You're really trying to get the bitterness from those. So for me, if I'm using Magnum 1 year that is maybe 12.2% alpha acid, and then 2 years later, it bumps up to say 14 or 15%, I'm going to change the amount of that Magnum that I use for that initial addition to match the IBU, only because I want it to be similar. I don't want it to be more or less bitter than what I'm used to. And I have to put a little bit of faith in, the folks who determined what the AA was on those hops, as well as, like I said before, the calculator and Brewfather, and the fact that is, whether or not that is actually going to impart the bitterness that I'm expecting. Anything after about 30 minutes, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or so into the boil, I go straight off of amount. So if 5 years ago I made a beer that I loved with a 15-minute addition of 1 ounce or 28 grams of Cascade, I don't care what the alpha acid is, I'm going to use that 1 ounce again. And yeah, there might be a slight variation in the bitterness contributed from that, but it's not going to be as much as say that 60-minute addition. So that's the only comment I have. If it works for you, by all means, I'm not suggesting you stop doing what works for you. I just find using IBU for those later additions to be, I don't know, interesting. Tell me more though, James. I would like to hear more about that. Very interesting. Overall though, the idea that you're saying you got to have some boil additions, right? That's something that my friend Brad told me as well is, in the professional brewing world, you hear a lot with hazy IPA of brewers just adding all of their hops post boil at knockout or whatever. And I've heard from a few people, one of them being Brad, that there's something that you get from boiling hops. You don't even have to boil them for that long, but having them in there for that. So yeah, I like that idea. 30-minute boil. Oh my gosh, you're crazy, James. Who would ever do that? I think hazy IPA is a perfect style for an abbreviated boil because you're not really using the boil for what it really is intended for at that point, which is the isomerization of alpha acids. So yeah, more power to you, buddy. I love it. All right, our friend Ryan Mack wrote in and said, I cheat to hit OG exactly every time. Oh, there are so many ways you could cheat this, Ryan. He says, I do brew in a bag mashes with 6.5 or 7 gallons of water per 5-gallon batch, which is typically short of full volume. Once the wort hits the fermenter, I top off with cold water until the tilt says I'm at OG. So I like this, Ryan, because it sounds to me like you are consistently overshooting your OG with that smaller amount of water, which makes sense. You would expect that if you've got your system dialed in. And then you can add cold water, which not only dilutes that wort so that you hit that target OG, but it also cools that wort down quite a bit faster than with a chiller in many cases. So I love it. Yeah. I know people who have to do the opposite though, and bring their OG up. In those cases, what do you do? Right. One of my buddies, he'll test his OG right at the end of the boil when there's maybe like 2 or 3 minutes left in the boil. And if he needs to bring it up, he just goes and either grabs table sugar or Pilsner DME and just adds just enough to get that OG where he wants it to be. And it works so well. It doesn't taste like an extract beer. It doesn't taste like cider, like a lot of people think with, if you're using table sugar. Really, really simple way to ensure that you're hitting your numbers every time. So good tip, Ryan. Craig Frazier says, I put a waterproof thermometer in the mash of my all-in-one system. I go off this temperature and not the temperature on the unit. This helps especially when doing mash steps. I'd be curious what unit you have, Craig, because this is an issue that I've experienced as well, where the temperature on one of my units, at least, I've got a couple of units. My Clawhammer one seems to do a lot better than the SS Brewtech one that I've been using even longer, where the temperature readout is really slow to update for one. And then when it settles, when I compare it to my Thermapen, it kind of depends on like how much I've stirred the mash, where I'm putting my Thermapen. The Thermapen will be more or less consistent. It's never, or not, I should say it's rarely in line with what I'm seeing on the readout on my temperature controller. So I really like this idea. I'd also be really curious what thermometer you're actually using. Is it like, I know that ThermoWorks makes some really cool stuff for barbecue and for brewing even, that is fully waterproof. You can drop it into the middle of your mash and it just stays there until, gives you a readout. Is it something like that, or are you doing something else? Really cool idea. And one, if you're a nut for precision like I am, which a lot of people would not guess that with me, I think that's a great idea. What I end up doing is just testing my mash temperature with my Thermapen like 5 times throughout the brew day. And I happen to be perfectly okay with like a 3 to 4 degree drop in mash temperature. That doesn't bother me at all. So that's my way of getting around it. I also don't really like turning using my electric brewing system to heat up my mash. I'll do it. Absolutely, especially in the wintertime when things are cooler and the temp of my mash drops faster. But in the summertime, unless I just like yesterday, I had to heat up my mash because it was 20 degrees lower than my target. But otherwise, once I got it to temp, I just left it there and it dropped another 2 degrees by the end of the mash step. And that doesn't bother me at all. But I really like the idea of tossing in a kind of an external thermometer with maybe even like a digital or a Bluetooth type of readout on your phone or something. Really cool stuff. All right, Christian Forstel says, I've zero modern gear aside from an Inkbird and a chest freezer, cobbled together my own fermenters and bottle. So it sounds like you bottle condition. My only requirements for fermenters are that they're airtight, can support a Mylar balloon lock for the win, and have a rotatable racking arm so I can bottle directly. My hazies are banging and fresh for months. That said, and it ain't that modern, but I can't live without dry ice. A CO2 tank cost me $50 where I live. Wow. But supermarkets give baggies of crushed dry ice for free. Christian, you didn't tell us how you use the dry ice. Are you using it for carbonation? Are you using it to purge your kegs? I would imagine that you could throw some dry ice in the bottom of a keg, close it up, and then just purge it every 2 or 3 minutes. And it would, get rid of most, if not all, of the oxygen that was originally in that keg. Genius idea. Where I live, a 10-pound CO2 tank cost me $20 to refill. I don't even refill it. I swap them out. Whereas dry ice is $1 a pound at our local grocery store. Still cheap, cheaper than CO2, but my CO2 tanks last, 7-8 batches. And that's with burst carbonation and stuff. But remember, I'm purging my kegs using the CO2 that's naturally produced during fermentation from the very batch that is going to end up going into that keg anyway. So I'm not wasting any CO2 on purging kegs these days. But still, dry ice. I want to hear more ways that people are using dry ice in the brewing process, because that like tickles my Mr. Wizard sciencey nerd part of my brain. Cool stuff, Christian. All right, Chef Man says, my new thing I do is just for saving water. Another water saving tip. I have a cooler, recirculating pump with ice water, and a recirculating copper wort chiller. The first 5 gallons of hot water that comes out of the chiller I have go into a bucket. It keeps my ice bath from getting too warm and melting the ice too fast, which drastically improves my chill time. It's too hot to throw onto the lawn, so when I'm ready to dump my ice water on the lawn, I only dump a third of it out. I then pour the hot 5 gallons of water into the remaining ice bath. Then I dump that onto the grass because it's not scorching hot anymore. We're always in a drought here in Colorado, it seems, and this year is one of the worst. The water companies are raising rates for anyone not reducing their water usage. Of course they are. My lawn still looks like shit, but it's better than dumping it down the driveway. Oh man, I can relate. I feel like I've already talked about this. It gets so hot where I live during the summertime. We're finally down in the 90s again, but we went a whole week where we were like 105 degrees Fahrenheit up to, I think, 111 was our hottest day of this year so far. By the time I'm done using my hot water from the chilling process for cleaning, it has dropped significant. I mean, it's been sitting out for 45 minutes to an hour. It's down to where I can put my hands in it comfortably and it's not going to hurt me. I don't even worry about it and just toss that on my grass. Maybe that is actually working against my intended purpose, which is to water the brown parts of my lawn. But those parts of my lawn are getting greener because I'm brewing every other week or so. And I'm seeing improvement in my lawn. So hopefully I'm not, but I love the conservation aspect of this and the trying to be thoughtful. Is it still wasteful? I don't want to pretend that it's not. I mean, we all have sprinklers. We could use those. If you're going to brew beer, you're going to have that water waste anyways. You might as well put it to good use. And if it happens to reduce your water bill from the crazy people at the water company who just want to make millions of money off of you and your water usage, millions of dollars, I should say, then yeah, keep doing that, Chef Man. That's rad. All right, Mike Snyder says, I brew mostly 10-gallon batches that I use the same grist bill in a 20-gallon mash tun, and then I split it up into 2 boil kettles where I can experiment with different hop schedules, then in 2 different fermenters, and I can use different yeasts, dry hops, etc. And then I'll have 2 different beers to enjoy with only adding a little time to the brew day. This is such a fun idea. I've done this a couple times as well. Even if you only have the ability to perform a mash for like a 5-gallon batch of beer, you can still split that into 2 smaller final batches, 2.5-gallon batches or whatever. And while, Mike, you're talking about different hop schedules, all that different yeast, stuff like that, you can actually do even more. If you mash, let's say 100% Pilsner malt, and you've got, your 8 gallons at the end of your mash or whatever, and you split those into different boil kettles, you can actually steep specialty grains. You could make a porter, you could make a stout by steeping roasted grains. You could add some crystal malt, you could add some honey malt, you could add some pale chocolate. You can make so many different types of beer. And then you're adding your different hops, you're fermenting with different yeast, maybe even at different temperatures. You have got 2 completely different beers that simply have the same base of Pilsner malt. I think that's rad. And I've only done that one time. It was many, many years ago. So I don't want to speak about it too much because I kind of forget for what my experience was like. I just remember it being really cool that I was able to make 2 beers in the time that it might take to make 1.5 beers, we'll say. So yeah, that's a rad tip, especially for people who like variety. And if you have those open taps, you might as well, and the ability to ferment 2 beers and boil 2 beers at the same time, you might as well give it a shot if you don't want to spend the time doing 2 consecutive batches of beer. You can get away with getting far more variety very, very simply. So, all right. WG says, I use chit malt in 99% of all the beers I make. Okay, I've said too much. So first off, if by you said too much, it's because you feel like you're giving us a secret or something, then yeah, buddy, you might have said too much. Here's the thing, and I got to admit it. I have never used chit malt in my brewing, and for no reason other than I've just never thought to do it. Back in my day, chit malt wasn't, like when I was getting started in brewing back in the early 2000s, nobody ever talked about chit malt. What we talked about was carapils, right? To get more body or for foam retention, head retention. My understanding is that that's what chit malt is used for these days. So what exactly is chit malt? I'm leaning on the internet here for this one. It's a very lightly kilned, barely germinated barley malt, it says. Because the germination process is stopped almost immediately after it begins, chit malt retains a high concentration of high molecular weight proteins, glucans, and undegraded starches compared to fully modified base malts. Brewers primarily use it as a functional specialty malt rather than for its flavor contribution. So what does it affect? Head retention and foam, body and mouthfeel, flavor profile. Apparently, it's extremely neutral with a very, very mild, like raw grain type of flavor that it works really well for Pilsners, Helles, lighter beers like that. Some people will use it to increase turbidity or haze in beer. So if you're making, say, a hazy IPA and you want it to have this term that I've heard, haze stability, you might reach for some chit malt. So yeah, 5 to 30% usage rates. I'm curious how much you use in yours. I don't have issues with foam stability in the beers that I make. I don't have issues with my beers not having the mouthfeel and the body that I'm aiming for in them. I feel like for whatever reason, the way that I brew or the recipes that I come up with, that's all factored into it. So chit malt would be contributing something more to my beers that I don't feel like I really need. But if it's a part of your regular process and you're using it successfully, that is awesome. I know people who are out there who are like, every beer I make, it doesn't matter what I mash it at, it doesn't matter what the recipe is, they come out too thin. Maybe chit malt is the secret that you have been waiting for. So you have WG to thank for that. And his secret is out. All right. Final little secret tip here on this episode comes from patron Paul Johnson, who says, I have no idea whether this makes a difference, but I can't stop doing it as my passion is super clear Helles. I always put a straining bag boiled for at least 20 minutes into my fermentation vessel when transferring from the kettle to strain out the majority of the trub. It's ironic on 2 counts as my first introduction to you guys was an episode based on a trub experiment. Secondly, your powdered thyme tip, gelatin, is the best brewing tip ever. So let's first focus on wort filtration between the boil kettle and the fermentation vessel. I've said it before. Yes, I do believe that there is some value in racking over at least some trub to the fermentation vessel. Nutritional stuff. It's going to feed gives the yeast some of the stuff that it really needs to perform well. And oddly enough, it does seem to produce or improve clarity at least. And so I do that. That being said, I do not pour the entire kettle into my fermentation vessel. Do I think that is going to, guarantee a bad beer? Absolutely not. I have had several beers that are fermented that way with the entire amount of kettle trub in the fermentation vessel, and they come out delicious, beautiful beers. I have had one experience which happened to be an experiment that I performed where doing that did result in a beer that I liked less than the one that had no kettle trub. So that influenced me, I'll admit it. These days, I just let whatever makes its way into the fermenter make its way into the fermenter. I don't dump it or do anything like that. Now, contributor Jordan Folks, who is our traditionalist, particularly when it comes to lager beers, his approach is to rack the wort out of the boil kettle into the fermenter, let it sit for a couple of hours, and then very gently decant off of that, out of that vessel into another fermentation vessel to basically eliminate, all but the smallest amount of that kettle trub. And then he oxygenates and does all of the stuff that you sort of need to do to replace, all of the good that you're getting from that trub in the wort. And he makes crystal clear, absolutely beautiful, lagers and such. Now, he is also not against using gelatin to make his lagers. And either am I. I absolutely love gelatin. It is such an awesome, brewing tip or trick that works almost every single time, and it works insanely well. It's fast, it's cheap, it's easy. I didn't think it would work at first, and I was shocked when it did. So if you're really into clear beer, I'm with you, Paul. That is absolutely something that I would recommend. Is the filtering, using a bag, is that really making a difference? It might be. You're absolutely going to reduce the amount of kettle trub that makes its way into the fermentation vessel. That being said, I would imagine you're still passing some stuff through that filtration bag into the vessel, probably to the extent that it's actually benefiting your yeast when you pitch it in there. So yeah, man, it works for you. Keep on doing it. Maybe it'll work for somebody else. All right. That was the last one, the last patron tip. All of those were so good. Thanks to our patrons for sending those in. I've got a couple more things that I thought of kind of on the fly as we were going through all of these during this episode that I want to get out there because I do think that it might be helpful to some other people. First off, yeast starters. I've never told anybody that I do this. Outside of some local friends, I think. But when I'm making yeast starters, which I've been doing quite a bit more lately, only because I'm getting yeast from my buddy Brad at Crow and Wolf, and he gets me a whole big pitch of it, and I don't use it all. Well, I want to make sure that it's still good, so I'll just throw together a quick yeast starter, add some of the slurry that he gives me, and it gets going very quickly. What I hate doing when it comes to making yeast starters is waiting for it to chill before I can toss my yeast in there. I don't want anything to take over, that starter when I'm not around or anything like that. So I want to get it down to my pitching temperature, my starter fermentation temperature, as quickly as possible. So what I do is I actually make my yeast starters with half the amount of water. So I'm making a concentrated wort with Pilsner DME, and then I boil it for 5 minutes. And as soon as it's done boiling, I add a whole bunch of ice to it. It chills it down almost immediately. Almost all of my starters are 1 liter these days. I don't use calculators anymore, nothing like that. And then I add what is the equivalent. It's a bunch of ice, but about half a liter of ice to the half a liter of hot wort that's in my flask. And it chills. I'm ready to pitch within like 2 or 3 minutes. It melts the ice right away. Don't get me wrong, but it melts it down to about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is fine for me to pitch my yeast into. So a very, very easy way to expedite the starter process. I'm Mr. Impatient over here. Another thing, this one is involving, post brew day cleanup. Like I said, I use the hot water from my immersion chiller for all of my cleaning, but what am I using to scrub all of my stuff with? If you have not brought Scrub Daddy into your brewing life yet, these weird little, the mine is green. I know they make different colors, but happy face sponge type things are so effective at scrubbing the gunk off the side of kettles, off of my, brewing spoon and all of that stuff. I've never used a product that is as effective at removing that stuff as the stupid little Scrub Daddy. And my wife was telling me yesterday, I actually had to text her while I was in the middle of cleaning because my Scrub Daddy disintegrated. And so she brought me a new one. She says, oh, you know what? Have you ever heard of Scrub Mommy? I said, what's that? It actually has like a real or like a normal sponge, I guess, on the other side for your softer cleaning duties. So that's an option as well. I am by note, we're not sponsored by Scrub Daddy. If they want to sponsor us, we're right here. That's just a real product that I have found to be insanely effective for my brewing cleanup, at least the way that I do my cleaning. So the final one, I already talked about it, but I just want to say it again because it's still fresh on the mind. Do not blindly trust the temperatures and such on your electric controllers. You know, I had a friend for years, my buddy Sean, who many years ago, who for about 6 months, every beer he made was finishing at way too high of an FG. The beers were still good. They didn't taste sweet or anything like that. They just were not as boozy as he aimed for, which is just so annoying. They were finishing about, 2 to 3% ABV lower than what he was planning. So a pale ale that was supposed to be 6% ABV would come out at 3.5% ABV because it finished way higher, at 1020, 1021 as opposed to 1009 or 1010, something like that. His issue was his thermometer. I don't know why it took him so long, but all of the buddies eventually got together to troubleshoot this. And one of us, I forget who it was, said, have you calibrated your thermometer? He pulls it out, throws it into a glass of ice water. And sure enough, it was about 20 degrees off in the warm direction. So he was mashing way warmer than he thought he was, which naturally is going to lead to less fermentable wort. Calibrate your stuff. Don't blindly trust electronic stuff. Make sure that you're regularly doing cross checks so you know that everything's right. And I think you're going to get away with some good batches of beer. And to all of our patrons who gave us their secret little tips, those dirty little things that, you might not want to mention publicly. Well, I've done it for you. So you're welcome for that. I really appreciate your guys' support. And that includes not just the pledges that you make over at Patreon, but submitting the topics or the information for the shows like this. I get a lot of feedback from our listeners who really seem to enjoy the integration of outside ideas and such. And we have our patrons to thank for that. If you have any interest in supporting us over on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/Brülosophy to see all of the rewards that you can receive for said support. And make sure to keep an eye on Brülosophy.com to stay current on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.